Hello and welcome to The Long Run, Navigating the Miles of Modern Leadership. I'm Martin Lewis, I'm your host, and I'm going to take you on a paradigm-shifting journey of a lifetime. Welcome back to Long Run, Navigating the Miles of Modern Leadership. I'm Martin, and today we're stepping into a conversation that sits right at the intersection of courage, care, and culture change. My guest is someone who doesn't just talk about leadership, she reshapes the systems leaders operate in. Elli Bliss is the co-founding director of Mokita training and consultancy and a practitioner working across anti-racism, women's health and organisational transformation. What I love about Elli's work is that it's grounded. It's not theoretical, it's lived, it's evidence-based and it's deeply human. Today we're exploring what leadership looks like when the stakes are real, when the systems are messy, and when the work requires both bravery and care. Hi, Elli. Lovely to be with you today.
Wow, what an introduction. Thank you.
I know, it always sounds more grandiose than it should, but it's an honest account, I think.
Thank
you. So first of all, I really want to sort of dive into your story a little bit, and think about the early stages of your career. When you look back at your early stages of career shaped by sort of nursing and academia and all of those sort of things, what were the moments that nudged you towards doing this on your own and going, into a domain where you could actually, I suppose, make palpable change?
Yeah, wow, what a big question. So I think I actually was reflecting on this with someone recently, and I have ADHD, and what I have come to discover around my ADHD is that systems aren't built for my type of thinking and brain. And I really struggle being a system that's really focused on neurotypical behavior. And that only seems to work for a small number of people. And I think that we can make systems that work for everybody and have a little bit more flex. And so for me to survive in a system or work with systems at a bigger scale, it was imperative really that I became an external partner to that and could step back and not be involved in all of the bureaucracy, but take an overarching look at systems and work with people and how they could make their systems more flexible to work.
It's great to have that extrospective view then, isn't it? And actually know as a kind of user or a participant within systems that they aren't working for you. So how reflective in terms of I suppose, in terms of mirroring your own experience, do your new ways of working kind of create cultures within your own company, I suppose?
Oh, I love this question because we talk about this all the time. So currently we are female led and we only have women working for us. And because we've worked in women's health for a really long time, we really centre that in our own conversations of how we work with women. So I very much believe in understanding around how the menstrual cycle plays out in someone's day-to-day kind of activities. So a lot of the time when we're having meetings, we will talk about where we're at in our cycle. So in a typical cycle, you've got 4 phases. So you've got, we call it your winter, which is when you're menstruating. Then you've got your follicular phase, your springtime, which is kind of your blossoming time. Then you've got ovulation, which is your summertime. And then you've got your luteal, which is also known as your autumn time. So depending on where you're at in your cycle is often how you're going to show up in work. So if you're bang in the middle of luteal menstruation, you might not be able to bring your full self. So we know that if we're delivering a lot of training and it's really heavy, we will try and work our rotas around our cycles so that we know that people are going to feel comfortable to show up as their best selves. Or if we've got a really big presentation coming up that we can't move, we will try and lighten our workload to less demanding work within that week running up to it. It's not always possible, but trying to manage that has been really beneficial to us and the team. And if we've got anyone working with us that might have like PMDD or endometriosis or other like really significant kind of womb related health issues, then us knowing this straight off is really helpful so that we can plan ahead with them around when is your best time to shine kind of thing, and when do we not need to put pressure on you and we might need to lighten the workload. And because of those conversations, people are really open with us. We really know our team really well. If someone is having a bad day because of their PMDD or endometriosis, like we understand and we get it, and there's no pressure. We're not just thinking, oh, they're just not managing life or they don't seem to be inputting. It's like we have an understanding and a genuine empathy towards them. And then obviously there's menopause and perimenopause and how that shows up and how chaotic that can be for people. And so again, really understanding that and like being in meetings with people, even not involved in our team directly, but we'll often be like, well, maybe, you know, they're experiencing this, and like we might try and plan our conversations a bit different kind of thing around it. So I would say from like a woman's perspective, like this has really made us work together on a really empathetic level, and it hasn't really been that difficult to organise at all.
That sounds really refreshing, isn't it? And have you seen this in other organisations at all? Because actually you don't hear a lot about that, because often, you know, organisations are very patriarchally set up, aren't they? But, you know, I just wondered whether this is mirrored anywhere else.
Not that I know of. I think there are a few companies now, like short kind of small entrepreneurs coming up who are predominantly female led, who have been trying out, but I haven't like really seen it properly being documented. We haven't audited it kind of against our outputs, as it were, but the team who work with us, they've always stuck with us from the beginning. We've been running for 5 years now, and they always want to come back. They always are involved in everything that we can do. So we're not losing any workforce from it. They report real high satisfaction to work alongside us. And I know for myself, my outputs are a lot higher working with my own menstrual cycle and understanding my own body than it ever was in any of the big organisations. And I've got, you know, my career was predominantly in NHS and then higher education, which is quite largely female dominated areas, and the lack of that conversation is wild to me now, understanding it. I think we would see a lot less sickness and absence if we really understood how that cycle plays out, and if we could rota that some way. I mean, producing this on a really large scale might be difficult, but actually if a ward were to consider this themselves between the team, and if they were able to build those relationships to have those conversations, I'm pretty sure they could manage it. I think one of the biggest issues that we have is that everyone's trying to do stuff on such mass scale that it's really affecting teams and the way that they work.
Do you think some of this is, you know, with a bit more openness around talking around menstrual cycles, it's something that possibly might become more prevalent within organisation?
I really hope so. And I think there's a lot of shame around menstrual cycles and things like perimenopause and menopause and things like that. People only ever whisper it in corridors. They, you know, even from exploring my own experience of older women going through it, no one at work would admit that they were perimenopausal or menopausal. It would be joked about in the staff room. And
like
not
the hot flush or senior moments or something like that.
Exactly. And what that stops people from doing is being like, I'm actually really struggling here with this workload and this demand, and I've got nowhere to go to, because everyone just thinks I'm incapable of achieving my job, rather than actually like, can I reach out to someone to talk about this, and is there a support system in place that will see me thrive in this period of time? And as someone myself, like going through perimenopause now, knowing this is so helpful to me, because the moment I started feeling these shifts, I was able to get on top of it. And now I'm more productive than I've ever been. We've just had the best year of business. I'm setting up a new business. And if you'd asked me this 2 years ago, could I have ever thought of doing that? Absolutely not. I was just in the depths of despair of not really understanding what my body was going through. And I reflect on how people were with me in environments, in all of the environments I've worked on, with some of the women who would have been going through menopause or perimenopause, and just they weren't particularly friendly to me. But I get it now. I fully understand why they weren't. But I wish I had known at the time, and I wish we could have had conversations about it to see if, not necessarily they would have wanted to engage with me at that time because I would have been a lot younger with them, but someone within the system that they could have gone to have really spoken about what was going on and how the work environment could have made it possible for them to have thrived. But even the lack of knowledge around perimenopause and what support access is there is just absolutely minimal, really. Like, no one really understands HRT. I mean, there are people that understand HRT, but on the general knowledge scale, people don't understand HRT. They don't understand the different types of hormones. And so they don't necessarily access that because there's so many myths around it. But actually getting to know that the different types of hormones and how to start HRT and what that looks like is a really great basis to support your brain, your mental health, your bone health, your physical health, lifting that fog that happens, the 2 p.m. crashes. How are people really managing those 2 p.m. crashes when they're expected to work a 5-day week with back-to-back meetings and they're barely able to keep up with their hydration? Like, the whole way that we demand productivity at the moment just isn't suitable to having great outcomes.
No, absolutely. And interesting there that you picked up on the fact that actually there is, if we can demystify things, things become, cultures can shift, different things can happen. And, I just want to kind of sort of move into a different thing and think about your work around challenging, cultures around anti-racism. And, I think what I want to ask is, what values have stayed constant for you throughout all of that as you've moved, sort of segued from, your, sort of understanding of menstrual health and perimenopause and all that sort of stuff, cultural safety, into anti-racism and all of those sort of things. What's the constant thread between those things?
I think seeing people where they're at and what their experience is, and everyone's experience is different. So, for instance, Black women are going to usually go into menopause earlier than white women, and having an understanding of what kind of stress they're under due to racism that they're experiencing in the workplace can bring on perimenopause and menopause earlier for them.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, because the stress that they're experiencing and the way that they're being treated within the workforce and the demands, the extra scrutiny that they're under, it's a real common understanding that Black women feel that they have to work twice, but I would argue 10 times as harder as white women have to do. And so it's not just in work that they have to do that, it's in everyday interactions that they're having. So just that level of extra stress that us as white people don't experience is exceptional on the body. We all joke around hot flushes, for instance, but what's really interesting about hot flushes is they are actually a red flag to people having cardiac disease in the future. And if we didn't joke about it, we might explore it with a bit more curiosity. So if you're sat with a woman who might look traditionally younger than what the kind of average age is of going through perimenopause, like, it's important to have that kind of health literacy around, this isn't funny, like, it's worth going and having these things checked out so that you can make sure your health is going to be okay for the future. We know that Black women are more likely to go off work with work stress. And is that because we're not making life easier for them at work? Can we do something and put something supportive in that environment for them to be able to thrive, make sure that they can get to their doctor's appointments, etc.? Because if we can get this sorted out for people, their productivity will increase because they will feel much better.
Yeah, and I'm guessing actually in terms of their longevity within a workplace, either a work environment or in work in general, because I know that from some of my research that I've done looking at sort of early retirement, the ability to continue on with work is significantly reduce in poorly managed menopause, isn't it? So,
one in 10 women we know 1 in 10 women will leave their jobs because of perimenopause or menopause. The data I haven't found yet, but I should imagine that increases on ethnicity data. So I should imagine the top group of leaving their jobs will be Black women, because they come out with the worst data sets of all data. Yeah. And other things, that if you're working in healthcare, for instance, if people are expected to do night shifts, we know that night shifts play havoc on the body. And there's this common saying within the NHS that the NHS is black at night. And what that's referring to is that it's predominantly Black members of staff that are working on shifts. They're not choosing to work night shifts. That if you listen to their experiences, they're doing it because that's when they feel safest to work, because they experience less racism at nighttime. They are often connected within a community who are also working at nighttime, and they feel a part and a sense of belonging. Or they've joined an agency because their experience hasn't been positive of being an actual part of the workforce. And so they join an agency because they just think that's the time that I can earn more money. If I'm going to have a bad time at work, then I may as well make the money for it, kind of thing. Exactly. Whereas actually, if you ask them what would be your preference, most of them want to be a part of the team. They don't want to be doing night shifts, but it's unbearable working environments. So again, it's a system that's in place. We don't have good relationships within the teams, and therefore we're pushing people out of the workforce or into a shift pattern that they don't particularly want to be a part of, and that will have health risk outcomes for them. So it's all of these things that maybe people don't necessarily think around, how Black women can be more affected by these certain things. But if we got a good culture on the ward of empathy and respect to people, then hopefully we would see better health outcomes ultimately for them. But of course, there's racial bias within research, and has that ever been researched? Not to my understanding specifically linked to the menopause, because it's barely been researched as it is.
No, absolutely. So we're talking a minuscule amount of a minuscule amount, aren't we there? So what I'm really hearing already is that you're a leader that's shaped by lived experience, by complexities of society, and certainly a willingness to step into uncomfortable spaces. Most people would probably avoid, actually. But actually, so that takes us into the next part of conversation, where I really wanted to look at a little bit more around your leadership in the anti-racism kind of domain, really. So an anti-racism asks leaders to move beyond awareness and into accountability. So what does accountable leadership in, I suppose, that racial justice domain look like?
Yeah, I think there's a big trap that people get, that they fall into, and it's around the use of trauma and traumatic stories. So traumatic experiences are very important to acknowledge, but it's what we do with that story and that experience that matters the most. Currently, what we're seeing in this environment is that we bring people with that lived experience to come and share this quite awful, traumatizing story, and they share it and we go, this sounds really awful, and then everyone leaves and then they carry on with their day and nothing moves forward. We should only be listening to those stories with an action at the end of that, so that there is point to that person coming in and sharing this experience with us, because otherwise
you're just re-traumatizing
exactly
people,
we just continue that cycle. So although your intention might be to, I need to hear this, the intention should be, I need to hear this and I need to do something about it. And I, as a leader, am in control of my policies, my pathways. I'm in control of how people feel within the workforce, and I'm in control of where funding gets spent to try and sort some of this out. And so if we are bringing people to share that experience with us, which is at risk of re-traumatizing them, the least that we can do is put an action at the end of it. Really, now we have so much data and we have so much lived experience to draw on, we should be asking ourselves the question, why do we keep asking people to share the same story with us? Why are we not spending our time and focus to work with them on that solution rather than just telling us what the traumatic story was? That's where we're going to see the change here. It's not about removing that lived experience story. It's about utilizing the story to change the system moving forward. but we're not doing that at the moment, and that's where the accountability lies on the leadership. We sit in so many places where leaders say to us, oh, I've been in leadership for like 10, 15 years, 20 years, and this conversation just never changes.
Yeah.
And all I want to say to them is, well, but who's responsible for that?
Exactly. Yeah.
You've been in the position of leadership. This stops with you. And until you put a KPI to it, until you put accountability to it, it's not going to change. But what I can't understand is the KPIs are very easy to develop because you have people going off sick all the time. You have people leaving your workforce. I mean, the amount of money that the NHS plows into foreign recruitment, it plows into negligence. It's like two point something billion pounds gets spent on discrimination in the NHS.
That's incredible, isn't it?
Which is a huge amount. So instead of just spending that on that negligence and that negative experience, plow that money into actually changing your system so they're fully functioning and people enjoy going to work and that we have longevity. We don't want our workforce to become patients. That's not helpful to anybody. People generally enjoy their jobs. Like, they want to be a nurse, or they want to be a doctor, or an allied healthcare professional, or someone in professional services. They love going to work, but they love doing it in a positive environment. And currently that's not existing for a lot of people when you look at the workforce data.
So, so I get the accountability bit there, but, is there sort of some level of educational responsibility here in terms of the fact that actually, rather than just let's just keep talking about it, let's have you talked about understanding of the lived experience coming in to educate and create change, but that change never happens and we just re-traumatize. Should there be a re-understanding of actually how we engage service user lived experience, or what they call it, expert by experience, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's not just utilizing service users' experience, it's also your workforce as well. They're going to be having their own experience. A model that we use at Mokita, and so my partner Alicia, we first met at the university that we worked in, and we had a coffee together. We were linked together by someone to do some work around anti-racism, and we sat and we didn't leave until like 7 p.m. because we were just talking about how racism appeared and within our own communities. And what we had discovered is that neither of us had ever had a cross-cultural kind of conversation. Like, we spoke about it within our own community, in our own kind of circles, but never across. And we realized that there was myths on both sides. And so what we strive to do is bringing that healing together. So whenever someone comes on our training or in our coaching sessions, you have someone with both the lived experience and a white person, because there's elements of decolonizing ourselves as white people and understanding our own socialization. And then there's that important element to listen to that lived experience and someone who understands how oppression works within the system. And there's space for both of these conversations. And what leaders don't necessarily recognize is they are socialized into racism, that we all are, especially if you've been grown up in this country through our school system. Reflecting on my own experience as a nurse, I was never trained how to assess black skin. I became a nurse, I was qualified, I still didn't get taught that. I then become a senior lecturer and I still wasn't teaching that until I started on my anti-racism journey. And I was like, this is basic. We are letting down a whole cohort of people very dramatically, and it's very serious and fatal. But it was recognizing the piece of power that I held in that space as a lecturer was I controlled what happened in my classroom, and therefore I could change that quite quickly. Absolutely. But it then meant that I then had to unlearn a load of stuff. Of the first question is, why did I never question it? Why did I not notice that? Like, it's such a huge failing, shamefully on my part, that like I would have people coming into my care and I wouldn't even think, I don't know how to assess your skin properly. And I've got like a history of cardiac intensive care, and if a patient bleeds out, I need to know that what colour their skin goes, because currently we're taught that they would go grey, but that's not going to happen on someone that's got black skin. And so just having to have those kind of reflective conversations and think, why did I not properly get this? What led up to the moment of me not having that realization before? You need people who understand socialization to help you get there. And that's where expertise comes involved. And sometimes I think people feel more comfortable having a conversation with white people about that. And also we can hold each other to account. And then you also need that person with that lived experience to, add that depth and richness to it. And that's why we always co-work together, because we can bring both sides to that conversation to really help unpack what's going on.
It's really quite helpful, isn't it? And so, I mean, it's clear that you've facilitated some incredibly high stakes conversations along the way there. What does it take to lead in those moments where it could be easy to shut people down, but you don't? What you do is you let them occupy that space. So what does it take to lead in those moments without shutting people down or letting harm slide into the conversation?
I think I have supervision, to be honest, because it is tough, but also I have to remain humble. Like, I had to go on my own journey here, and I had to start somewhere. I was getting it wrong, and I have to remember what that felt like. And so it would be a miss of me to go into these spaces and heavily judge people, knowing how our socialization works in this country. But I think also it's important to note that the way systems of oppression work, and this happens all the time to women, is that the best way of getting the oppression to work and thrive is by getting the oppressed people to do the oppressing. And then the white people at the top kind of sit as the puppeteers, being like, oh, my hands are clean here because I'm not necessarily the one that's doing it. So everyone has something to look at within their own years of socialization in this. And that bit can be really tricky. And again, that's why we have two facilitators at all times, because it's not necessarily my place as a white person to have those conversations. And it's really about knowing where you can bring the best bit of yourself into this conversation, and knowing when to be quiet and knowing when your voice will be validated and should be heard.
Yeah, sort of really kind of allowing you the privilege that you've been afforded to occupy the right space.
Yeah, definitely. And sit down when it's not welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Enough said. Just back off now. So what I found really interesting, I think this kind of feeds into some of the work that you've done with active bystander facilitating. What does that work reveal about organisational culture and leadership readiness?
I think that's a really good question. I think a lot of organizations know that they have issues, they just don't know how to solve those issues, and they're not necessarily able or willing to put the funding behind it. The problem that we have and I really hate the term EDI in a sense, because I think it's been tarred with this brush of it's a fluffy subject, it's a soft skill. But having been in this space for the last 10 odd years, there's nothing soft about being in this place. You have to hold your own so well in these spaces to not allow that defensive barriers to come up. The conversations can turn on you. People can get super ragey with you. They can get very defensive. They can blame you for their entire trauma response. And that's a really difficult space to be able to handle. And someone that works for us, Kimberly Fuller, she's a psychotherapist who specializes in racialized trauma, and she talks with us in our training, but also to us as a team. And originally she was the person that was supervising me, but we got on so well that actually we ended that so she could work for us. Now I'm supervised by someone else. But it's really about understanding what does trauma-informed approach properly look like? How can you properly get people to understand there's nothing soft about this, and you have to start funding this properly, and you have to get the right people to be able to hold these conversations. You have to look at your structures. If you don't look at your structures, nothing will change. People have to recognize how they uphold the structures. But currently the way that the NHS works, or larger organizations as they are based on a white Eurocentric framework. And unless we're willing to deconstruct those and reconstruct them into a different way, things probably aren't going to change.
No, it's interesting, isn't it? Because actually, what we're kind of describing there is kind of healthcare all over, isn't it? In the fact that actually, often, people plough lots of money and lots of time into whiz bang, high headline grabbing kind of concepts. It might be a new MRI scanner, it might be the new helipad for the trauma centre, it might be I don't know, a very glossy safety report or something like that. But actually, at the bottom of all of this are people trying to work within a system that's not set up for them. And actually, shouldn't we actually thinking, okay, well, to maximize safety, to maximize performance, to maximize experience, and maximize value, we should actually be investing in these so-called soft areas.
Yeah, exactly. So when we talk to people about our active bystander, our mission is not to make HR departments suddenly really busy with people whistleblowing and putting in formal complaints and grievances, even though that they would probably be well entitled to do that, because I think it does raise a lot of issues and people are validated in that space to go, yeah, this is actually my experience. But the way that it's mapped out is that actually we want teams to take accountability for how their team is on more of a nuclear level, and how can they just create change within their own sphere. Because if with racism is centuries years old. If anyone offers anyone a quick fix to racism, never engage with them. It just won't work, because we are trying to undo centuries worth of work. So we need to really think around, everyone's got to find their piece of power of how can they dismantle the structure that they work in and make it work for the team that's surrounding them. And if everyone took accountability for their own work practice, then we would start seeing a change. And so active bystander really just starts the foundation of that thinking around what can you do as one individual on a subject that is massive and huge and does need to have this big structural change, but not everyone can implement that structural change because they don't have the power to do that. But we do give you the tips and tools, like to be able to assess yourself in order to be able to change the bits that you can change.
I suppose what I want to ask now is, if there's one myth about anti-racism that you wish leaders would let go of, what would it be?
One myth? I mean, there's so many myths.
I know. I'm trying to limit your shopping list here.
One myth.
I suppose the one that might, for you, I suppose, could this be an enabling, really drop barriers and, kind of allow some of that cultural shift that, you're talking about here?
I think one myth is that you can just buy your way out of it without doing reflective work, especially as a leader. Like my desire and want to really change this conversation would be that every leader in any large organization, so whether that be something like the NHS or even a private organization, would have proper one-to-one coaching on decolonizing their mind. Because I think so often they just think, okay, my intention is to remove this, but they forget to do the bit of work about themselves. And so therefore they then fall into these quick win traps that then don't actually see any of the impact that's needed. But that's because they don't truly understand it.
It's interesting that it actually really mirrors the sort of world that I exist in sort of well-being. People will buy a well-being day for their organization, where they'll get a yoga instructor in, or someone who does NLP or mindfulness, which is lovely. It's great, and you feel really relaxed. But of course, what it's not doing is it's not putting strategy in place for your everyday, like when you're firefighting, 9 to 5 days a week. So but I think
I'm a big believer that yoga can work for people, and I would hate to take that away from people, but ultimately it's not going to change our systems. And that's because I think that leaders don't necessarily understand what the systems are demanding of people in the world that we've got. Even when you think about email, the history of email was replacing a letter. When you worked in an office, you might have received that letter and then you wouldn't be expected to reply to that letter in the person down the corridor until a few days later, maybe, or maybe the next day. Now we're bombarded with like hundreds of emails and everyone wants a response like this, but there's no time and scope that's being created for people to actually do their emails. I was at a conference last week. It was an international integrated care conference, and this company had really looked and explored this kind of thing, and they'd stripped down to a 4-day working week, and they also put in like a well-being hour, but you could do whatever you wanted in that hour. So it might be that you're visiting an ill relative, you're doing your shopping, whatever it was. And then it was a 4-day working week, and they found that their productivity has massively increased. Their workforce are really happy. They've really enjoyed working there. They don't want this to go. They've seen better outputs. And I know, as a working mum with 2 small kids, like navigating drop-offs and school holidays, and when am I going to have time to do my shopping? To be given that hour would be lovely. I mean, I've scoped out a business to allow myself to do that, but if I don't think I could go back into employment, because I'd be like, I wouldn't be able to live my life in the way that has been working for me.
No, and you've totally hit the nail on the head there, that actually the modern world of working and the construct of business is built around a male point of view, isn't it? Is that actually, as a man, I get up, jump in my car, I go to work, that's it, but actually, or I might get a bus, and actually that bus goes from my house straight to there. But of course, that bus route wouldn't work for a woman who might have to do several drop-offs at various different schools, maybe visit an elderly relative, go to the pharmacy, whatever it might be. That mental load very much shifts there. I think it's great there's such a clear thread in your work, the shift from that performative approach towards work and leadership to a very accountable approach, not just you, but people around you, that's kind of advisory, rather than evangelical. I want to explore a little bit about how that pays out a bit more, going back to the women's health, if I may. So you've really taken a deep dive into menopausal coaching, and I, obviously that is clearly sort of lived experience and from what you've kind of recognised around you. But was there? I just wondering what part of the leadership around that might have drew you into that space.
As in, do you mean like how can leaders support people?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, we could take it that way. Yeah, that would be a good start.
I think it's about having a really open culture around the discussion of it. I think that, again, it's just not something, you might have a women's network and it's whispered in the network, or there might be like a little supplementary email that goes out because it's menopause awareness day, month, or whatever it is. But actually, like, when an employee comes into the workforce, like, being really open and honest around, this is what our viewpoint is on menstruation, and having a menstruation policy which includes menopause, but also all of the other things that menstruation can affect a woman. And by being super open about it right at the start, will allow that person to decide whether they're willing to engage with you and feel that they can trust you and say, these are the issues that I'm having. But the key important part of that is actually living up to what your policy says. It's not just about having a policy that's collecting dust on the shelf. It's about having a fully functional policy that has a clear framework of how to support people in the workplace around it. And I really want to highlight that this isn't just a conversation for women or people with a womb. This also has huge impact on men as well. Lots of men are in relationships with women. And we see that one of the biggest times of relationship breakdowns is in people from age 40 to 50, 55 kind of time, which coincides with perimenopause and menopause. And if your relationship isn't fully functioning at home and you're going through it with someone at home, your productivity at work also isn't going to be great. So actually, if you're a man working in a system around women, it's really beneficial for you to know about the relationships that you have with menopausal people to help aid relationship building.
Do you know what? I wish I'd known what I know now certainly when my mum was going through menopause. I think it would have been really useful, you know, and these aren't the conversations that take place in our education system, you know. So you
No.
learn about reproductive health to the point of having a baby, you know, essentially, you know, and then it drops off a cliff, doesn't it? And it's like actually reproductive health goes way beyond that, you know. So how do we kind of fill that void for young people, do you think?
So what you just described there was socialization to a T, right? Like we go into school and we rely on school giving us our information, but school back when we were growing up and still today, like, doesn't properly cover menstruational health. So it should properly be, although it is supposed to be in the curriculum, there's no kind of accountability to what's actually in the curriculum. So they just have to utter the words for them to tick a box and say, we talk about menstruation, but there's not real clear kind of guidance, like looking at like, oh, how are you doing this, how are you delivering it? And you know, traditionally we separate people into genders, so it's like the boys go off and learn over here and the girls go off and learn here. We learn nothing about how each other actually feel about it. We don't know how to communicate our own bodies. You know, most women believe, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I'm sure you can you can cuss it out, but most women think their vagina is actually their vulva. So lots of women don't even know their own body anatomy, and then neither do guys. So you know, you might have someone at work who's having repeated UTIs and they're having a lot of time off work because of their UTIs. But a lot of women don't know that you can treat that quite effectively with vagina estrogen cream. And really, like, I would highly recommend and get people to consider starting that from, well, actually I believe it from postnatal, because breastfeeding really messes up with your estrogen and vaginal dryness. But actually from 40 onwards, you know, like having preventative care like that can massively improve things for you and reduce the risk of prolapse, UTIs, etc., which again are significant things that people have to have time off work for. But having a menopause coach at work or a menopause champion, you know, we have therapists that people can go to. Why can we not have menopause coaches that people can go to, that they do a 7-week kind of seven session time with a menopause coach, or however that looks for the individual, to teach them around what's going to happen to their body, what could potentially happen, get informed around what will happen. So when you start seeing these shifts, you jump on it before you reach the crisis point, before your relationship has broken down, before your kids and you are at each other's throat, before you and your boss are no longer seeing eye to eye, before you're falling out with everyone in the office, before you just are so filled with anxiety and brain fog that you just don't even recognize yourself, and then you're suddenly having all these health issues out of nowhere and you don't understand why. Like, we can get people educated quite quickly and easily on their body, so they don't get to that point and people can really thrive. Like, we have to work, let's be honest, probably until we're 70 now. Like, if we don't have the right hormones and we're not in balance, there is no way women will be able to work till that long.
No, for sure. And do you know what? Everything that you just spoke about there just reminded me of conversations that I had as a fairly young but still senior leader within healthcare, and having to kind of support members of the team who were going through menopause. And I was learning as I went. I was like, it's like, where do I get this information from? And actually, what I kind of almost unhelpfully did at the time, but probably thought it was helpful, was like, I'll be led by you, and actually, but they're also looking for you to give them support, and it's like, but I'm led by you, and actually, that was on one hand very helpful because it was very person-centered, but it also wasn't aware. I was very blind in that kind of moment. Which kind of makes me want to just talk about systemic blind spots, if we may, about women's health. So what systemic blind spots does women's health reveal about how organisations are designed?
Can you just expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, so basically, thinking about, okay, there might be something in the setup, something in the policy, something in that just doesn't account for how women's health presents over even just over a single cycle, or over a life cycle?
So I think it exposes gaps because, as you were saying before, we come at it through such a patriarchal lens and a male lens. A male cycle is 24 hours, like hormone cycle is 24 hours, where a woman's is a whole month. And so when we peak and trough in our energy levels is very different to that of a man. But then added on that the burden of childcare, often it's left to women to kind of care for a relative. The day-to-day house chores, if you're a single parent household, it's often the women that have brunt the childcare for all of that. So policies around not having flexible working, are critical for some women, and that increased stress of like, how am I going to pick up my kids? How am I going to do all this extra curricular stuff that I have to do just to survive the day? So having very rigid policies that don't consider the women's experience can really further put women at risk with regards to stress levels, which we know stress makes perimenopause and menopause much worse. But it's not just those conditions, it will be people with PMDD, endometriosis, all of the kind of like womb health conditions get so much worse because of it. If we have raised cortisol, that's like the worst for us, right? But those policies can really hinder some of that for us to reduce it, and that hour of yoga isn't going to budge if the policies
it'll be nice to be nice and flexible, yeah. But you've still got those hormones.
But also I think what's interesting to reflect is like the healthcare system itself. So like I said before, I have a cardiac kind of background, and when a woman presents, I remember teaching, a woman will present differently to a man having a heart attack, and we don't really know why, but it's just because it's not researched on, and so they get called atypical. But it's not atypical. What atypical is it's basically we don't know. But we don't want to own that we don't know. So we're just going to put this fancy word, atypical presentation, which will affect half of the population because we can't be bothered to fund the research and get to know it. So all these women are being constantly missed. And then because their presentation isn't being picked up properly and it's not being managed properly, their increased risk of needing to have more medical appointments, more time off work is going to affect them. And if you don't have a policy that reflects them to allow them to go to their appointments or get proper time off, that should be paid ultimately, because it's not fair that because we're called atypical, we have to then go and see a doctor, or we have to pay privately to try and get someone to listen and validate our experience. But so the whole system, there's so many touch points that affect them in such a way. And without having someone that's got that clear vision of how systemic oppression plays out within the workplace, across mapping it against healthcare, it can be really hard for organisations to think really clearly around, well, what does improvement look like for our workforce, and what do people need from us, and how can we still maintain good productivity and outcomes that we need as a business, but also keep our workforce happy so they want to stay here. The amount of money that we spend on workforce and people leaving the workforce is extortionate, really, when it doesn't have to be that way.
No, absolutely. We can reinvest. You touched a little bit on research there, and I will come back to that later. So I'm not going to gloss over that because I think it is an important point. But I just wanted to kind of really focus in on supporting emotional labour here. How do you help leaders navigate emotional labour and stigma that often sit around the topic of menstrual cycles and menopause?
So I think this is a really key one. It's about having setups in place to allow women to talk. There's got to be a space. Sometimes just having that conversation is really helpful, but again, it's about having systems in place. So like I said before, if your company, your employment system allows therapists, you need to make sure that those therapists are menopause trained or have menopause literacy around that. But it's the same for racism. So many therapists don't have racial literacy. So if someone's experiencing racial discrimination, they're told to go and have counselling. Then they're met with a counsellor who doesn't know or understand what they're talking about, and the harm is recreated in that space. It is the same here with menopause care. And it's not just a case of, okay, go and drink some more water or go and eat some more protein. Like, there is fundamentally the oppression and invalidation happening, and being able to have a space to process that can be really beneficial. Lots of people talk about menopause rage, being that it's just these years of oppression just like suddenly coming out of people, and like kind of too right, because they've been like suppressing this for a really long time.
We've got absolutely every right to come out and be vicious about it.
So setting up a space for them to be able to talk about that and process that information and think, like, what can I do? What do I need? A question that women often don't get asked is, what do I need and what do I like? Like, what do I actually like? Is it what society likes me to have, or is it what I want? Like, what do I actually like? Do I like being in a thinner body, or actually do I just want to eat the food that I want to eat? Can I just sit in my office and eat all the chocolate that I want to eat without being judged? Like, we don't just reflect, what music do I like? Do I actually like this music because I like it, or because society has told me? Is there a skill that I've always wanted to learn because I just enjoy it for what I want? And it's really interesting when you look at hormones, the way that women are denied testosterone in this country. So testosterone is framed as it's for your libido, but what people fail to realize is libido isn't just about sexual function. This is your creativity hormone. This is your lust for life hormone. This is the hormone that, like, when you wake up in the morning, you're like, I feel really great. Like, that's what its sole purpose, well, not sole purpose, it does many things, but that's a really big element to it. But in the guidance, it's really around your sexual function and whether you are keeping that element of your life alive. And it's only when that small part is hindered will you then be able to get testosterone prescribed on the NHS. It fails to recognize the mental health benefits of it from the rest of your life. And it's like, again, is this just the desire to please your husband? Like, there's so many people who are in same-sex relationships saying, like, because I don't sleep with a man, my doctor isn't even considering it because that's
crazy.
It's really crazy, but there's so much amazingness that can really benefit. Like, it doesn't work for everyone, granted, and it should be your choice whether to take it, but it's about having that informed choice to even take it. And the joke with it is it's so cheap. To the NHS, it's literally pennies. Like, even in private healthcare clinics, it's still one of the cheaper hormones that you can access. Like, it's really, really cheap. And it can when it works for people, it can work incredibly well. And there's lots of studies, granted, most of these are done on men, but that SSRIs work really well with testosterone, and adding testosterone to the HRT, well, they don't necessarily say that bit because it's not research, but if we consider taking it from those male studies, if it works really well with SSRIs, they can start reducing SSRIs and they continue just on testosterone. And if you're taking a body identical testosterone, then that's really safe for your body. It's not a synthetic hormone. There is testosterone that's synthetic, and it's a different compound that we naturally have, and that does come with risks. But the body identical, it's as cheap as anything, and it can have amazing benefits. It can protect your mental health, it can protect your heart health, it can protect your lust for life, your creativity. It can be a really wonderful hormone, and often is missed for women. And it's really sad, because I think if we started seeing a lot more women being on testosterone again, they would probably want to be at work more often. They would want to connect with people, because it's that lust for life, it's that connection building, it helps with your oxytocin, etc.
It's interesting that we're kind of really sectionalizing people, because it is very built around a very not only biological model of treatment, but also very patriarchal again, isn't it? So So just want to move on. I think actually, you know, there's lots of nuance kind of going into your kind of leadership style, and I really love this, because the nuanced leadership style is the one that really sits in the space where change can happen, I think. And that brings us really neatly on to thinking about evidence, and you hit on evidence here a little bit throughout everything that you've been saying, but you know, previously we talked about the fact that there is underfunding of women's health research. What do you think the major barrier to that is?
I think women don't sit in enough leadership positions, and I think then some women who do sit in those leadership positions take on a patriarchal lens. You know, like on a basic level, we see this in nursing. So nursing is predominantly female orientated, right? There's loads of women. You would think it's like the most awesome place to work as a woman, but it's really not. They really take on a patriarchal lens, and women will really suppress other women. So when you come in as a newly fresh band 5 and you demonstrate that you want to be involved in leadership, they're like, no, you've got to do your dues. There's no way that you can become a leader for like years. You've got to work up the ranks. You've got to impress everyone. If you're a man that comes into nursing, you qualify, you're like what the statistics suggest is within a year you'll be a band 6. And it will be women pushing you into that leadership because there's this unconscious or conscious belief that men make better leaders. And there's no question about it. It's like, you can't care. Get out of our space. You go into leadership and you do what you've got to do.
Let's do the caring work.
Yeah. But then those men are the leaders of women, and they don't necessarily recognize what it's like to be a woman in this workplace. And like, and then the women who are sitting at the top with that patriarchal lens on don't necessarily stop and think, oh, what was my experience like? What hurdles did I jump? And this is something that I've really recognized with working with leaders for the last 5 years, is that they seem very disconnected to themselves. They've almost had to be to get to the position that they are. And when we have a leader who is well connected to themselves, they understand their own wants and desires first before anyone else's, they're generally much more compassionate towards the rest of humanity. Whereas the ones that have felt like they've really had to fight for every moment that they've got with climbing up the ladder seem very disconnected to themselves and really having that kindness and compassion for themselves. And how can you give that back to people if you're not doing that for yourself?
Yeah, I think, you know, all of these things are kind of really resonating with me, you know, and it's my lived experience as well, you know, that actually you said like getting promoted to band 6 within a year. But you see it everywhere, and that actually what we need to be doing is we need to be championing people, don't we? You know, essentially, regardless of, you know, their background, their gender, sexuality, whatever it might be. But again, it's challenging that socialization, isn't it? You know, actually, and then, you know, like having women, you know, some women taking on really masculine leadership traits as well. And certainly, you know, I did the opposite, you know, which was, you know, I could have gone in and been a very masculine leader, but actually I believe that actually in healthcare and actually probably most the traditionally more feminine leadership traits are much more powerful.
That's probably why we got on so well.
Yeah, good. Right, let's move on. So really interesting. The evidence in your domain is probably a little bit imperfect. Okay, so how do you lead when the evidence is imperfect?
I think that we listen to women and we take it back to basics. You know, there's an amazing doctor called Dr. Louise Newson who's leading in hormone health, and she's very good in acknowledging that in her lifetime and in probably my lifetime, we're not going to have randomized control trials, but we can listen to women and we can think back to basics. You know, when you're going through perimenopause and menopause, essentially what is happening in that transition is you are becoming deficit in hormones. This is, you know, she talks about this a lot, so I really want to give her credit to this because it's really important that like her work is credited here. And so she is very much in the line of thinking of like, we just have to go back to basics. We're outliving our ovaries, is what's happening. Because of science, we have antibiotics, we have surgery, we are able to live a lot longer, but our ovaries aren't used to living that long. And so if we're diabetic, if we needed a stent within our heart to keep us living longer, we would do that no problem. We would put that intervention in. But when it comes to hormones, suddenly we're very angsty to do that because we don't have a random controlled trial that we're never going to fund. But it's basic science. So we don't always need a randomized controlled trial to be able to implement some care for someone. We just don't need that. That doesn't happen in every element. But for some reason, when it comes to hormones, when they're body identical hormones, they're very safe for people to take, we suddenly become, oh no, very, very cautious of it. But we would rather give them some more chemically kind of drugs that do come with more risk factors. Like, why can't we start off at the stuff that's very safe and very cheap to us first, rather than putting us on one set of like drugs that are quite hardcore to the body, and then they probably really need another set to counteract the interactions of those drugs. Like, let's go back to basics. Let's start at the basics, see how you feel first. We're so quick to put people on contraception. So I was told that they just needed to wipe out my cycle. I was too young for perimenopause. Just, wipe out your cycle with contraception. I didn't need contraception. I don't plan to have any more kids, but I still don't need it. I like living in a secular living. It's like the first time for a long time that I've done it. And oral contraception doesn't work for me. Now I understand, because I've got ADHD, and the progesterone in that really affects ADHD brains. Whereas the body identical progesterone works incredibly well for my brain. It's natural hormone. It's very safe for me to take, along with body identical estrogen. And I had to go private for someone to validate that. And there is research around this. It may not be a randomized controlled trial, but there is research around it. And when you get to speak to a hormone specialist that knows what they're doing, like, it's really helpful. And my life has completely turned around, and I'm getting to have my bleed once a month. I'm clear-headed. It's a very safe drug, and I'm very grateful that HRT exists.
Yeah. Do you know what? It's the funding around healthcare is probably structured in a way that doesn't support this, isn't it? Is that actually, for NICE to kind of come up with a guidance, it needs to have some structural RCT, which is probably which would have been then kind of systemically or meta-analysed and all of that sort of stuff.
Well, that's interesting.
Do you feel this is an oversimplification?
No, but the thing is, it is in NICE to give people body identical hormones.
Okay.
Like, it's and this is what's really wild to me, and especially as being a nurse and working on wards and on geriatric wards for the elderly. Like, I have done that. I did that like from my early stages of career as a student nurse, and I worked on wards quite often. Never once saw an elderly patient on HRT or vaginal estrogen. Yet we know that in the NICE guidelines, it says if you have repeated UTIs, vaginal estrogen should be offered. But they're not looking at it. Right, okay. They're not looking at the guidance, even when it is there.
It's an awareness issue. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's fine.
Another thing I would just really want to quickly highlight, just around systemic bias for women. So there's a big study called the SWAN study. And we get our average age of menopause from the study, pretty much. So it's average age of around 50ish, depending on your ethnic background. But that study only looked at women from 40 up. So it doesn't count anyone in their 30s. So how do we actually know? Because they just made this assumption of like, okay, so we're just going to go with women from 40 because we just assume that that's when things start to shift for people. But there's new research that has come out now that has said that people who have got ADHD, or they're a bit neurospicy, are likely to feel those shifts from the ages of 30, like into their 30s. So it could be early 30s, mid 30s. So actually, that study is really messing us up to get access. And so people who are really body aware will go to their doctor and then will be dismissed for years, going and be like, there's something wrong. And we would rather send them to expensive gynae, like outpatients appointments, consultants, they'll have scans, they will look for everything else first before
Over
they
investigating.
acknowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Before they acknowledge this is probably a hormone imbalance. And actually, like, I didn't need any of those investigations at all. All I needed was just some simple hormones, and that could have saved the NHS loads of money just on my own experience, let alone the all the other women that my story will be very similar to.
I think this is fascinating because it's an intersection between two, what we would class as, and you used this word earlier, atypicalities, isn't it? First of all, neuroatypicality,
Yeah.
and then also a physiological atypicality. And actually, when those two collide, what it actually exposes is that there's just a lack of awareness around how presentations might vary depending on your different circumstances, whether those social or physiological.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you think of system structures, right? Doctors, and like, it's their socialization. Some of them will have about a 2-hour lecture on the whole of kind of menstruation, and that will be it. In nursing, it's traditionally not spoken about. I did a post on my Instagram just recently and looked at, there's around, I think it's 2 million people who've got cardiac disease in the UK. So every nursing every nursing program I know of will have a designated cardiac module talking about cardiac health. It probably is in almost every year talking about cardiac health. That's for 2 million people. 13 million women will go through the menopause, yet there isn't proper pathways of support. You go into any hospital, they will have a cardiac pathway for heart attack or like stroke. There's great stroke pathways, COPD pathways, but the numbers of those people compared to women going through perimenopause are so minor. There's 13 million women at any one point in this country going through it, but yet we don't take it seriously, and it's barely mentioned in curriculum. So we can't blame the doctors because they're not being taught about it.
No.
It's not on their radar. They're not conscious to that thinking of it.
Heads are in the sand, aren't they? Because you don't know what you don't know. But interestingly, there, you talk about having these great cardiac pathways, great stroke pathways, and we know that saves lives. Okay, but this can save lives too, can't it? I think often we kind of, because I suppose there is a underplay of menopause within our society, is that we don't take it seriously, but this could actually be the difference.
And we don't
within someone's
recognize
lifestyle.
How much of our entire body it affects. So we get told as women, it's hot flushes, it's not being able to sleep at night, you just have to grin and bear it, and then it will all be over for you. We don't talk about the mental health element to it. We don't talk about the cardiac issues. We don't talk about the recurrent UTIs, the vaginal dryness. Like some people are so sore down there that it will expose the nerves. And actually, they don't need to get to that position. Imagine trying to go to work and being that sore when vaginal estrogen can prevent that from happening for people. So there are these very cheap, easy things to be able to put into place to be able to keep women in the workplace. This is just only, I've spoken it from a very clinical element, I guess, but there's lots of lifestyle things that can be changed. And that's why I think like having a designated menopause coach embedded into an employer system program, for instance, would be really beneficial, because I think 7 weeks with a menopause coach could really set women up to success for keeping them in the workforce.
Definitely, and actually probably lead to a reduction in diagnosis of other things as well, won't it?
Absolutely.
Certainly, I can see how someone might be misdiagnosed as burning out when actually they're just struggling through the menopause.
Exactly. Burnout is massive. And imagine you've been worked all your life to get to your pinnacle of your career, which you're going to be at in perimenopause or menopause, and then suddenly it's just swept away from you. But not only is it swept away from you, you're leaving that profession being like, I didn't leave at my best. I left with people probably thinking I couldn't do a good job. I'm left feeling I couldn't do the best that I know to my ability. And that sucks, because actually, like, you've put a lot of time and effort into your job and your workplace, and you don't want to be leaving the end of your career feeling like that.
No, it's totally sad, and it shouldn't. It certainly needs looking at. This does kind of bring us on to the final part of the conversation today, which is the lessons, the hope, and what next. So what leadership behaviours actually shift in your experience? What's the movable ground that's easy for anyone to do should they have the will?
I think deep reflection and taking accountability, finding out what kindness and compassion means to you and what you need as an individual for yourself. Like, how do you achieve that yourself? What do you need to give yourself before you can give to other people? I think healing has to be done in this space. I think there's a lot of wounded kind of soldiers in leadership because they haven't experienced that kind of compassionate leadership themselves, and they've been made to work excruciating hours. They've had their work scrutinized, and actually, if they had a bit of kindness and compassion show to them, they would recognize like how good that feels, and they would want to give that back to other people. And I think that, I just think it takes that reflectiveness to really start seeing a shift. When we've coached and we've worked on a one-to-one level with leaders, that's when we've seen the biggest impact, rather than just a kind of tick box exercise, which we don't do because we know it doesn't have impact. But those are when those beautiful moments happen, and I think leaders should give themselves that time to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's great. What's giving you hope right now in the work that you're doing?
This is a really interesting question, because there's two parts to this. So in my anti-racism kind of field, I had a lot more hope, to be honest, than I did a few years ago. I feel, if I'm being realistic and honest, we're taking a step back from where we were, post the murder of George Floyd. We were at a standstill with COVID. People had time and space to really reflect on oppression and how it played out in their lives, like whether their personal lives, whether it was their work lives. And there was this big empathy drive to like change it. And now we're seeing politics change. It's becoming more divisive. So it's like I feel like we've got more people who are really kind of going against it, and then we've got more people who are really passionate about it to change. We're missing that middle piece kind of thing.
Quite polarized then.
It's really becoming polarized. My hope for that is politics changes so that there's a bit more kindness and compassion in that, because at the moment it's not serving us well as a country and a world. But then in the menopause space, there is hope. I feel like that conversation is changing, and I do feel like more women are able to speak about their experience. There is pushback, don't get me wrong, but I think the more we talk about it, the better it is. But I still think we have to do the same in anti-racism work. I think there still has to be this big level of commitment for us to change. We have centuries. I always say, like, I'm not responsible for what my ancestors did. I have no control over what they did. But what I do have responsibility for is to stop the harm that is being created by what they did. And to do that, I have to reflect on what pieces of the world I touch and where colonization has touched them, and how I can decolonize that part of myself. But that does take time, and it does take reflection to do.
Definitely, and a huge responsibility as parents as well for the future that we've got. So Elli, thank you. What you've shared today is a reminder that leadership isn't about being the loudest voice. I think it's really about actually putting your accountability at the forefront and saying, do you know what, it's my responsibility to do this, and it rests on my shoulders, as it should be. For anyone who's listening, who's navigating change or trying to lead in systems that weren't built with everyone in mind, I hope this conversation gives you both clarity and courage. As always, keep leading with intention, keep asking better questions. Thank you, Elli. It's been brilliant talking to you, and thank you for listening. Keep on running your own long run.